All right, welcome everybody to our 2023-25 CSP subgrant, Subchapter C grant webinar. Excited to have everybody here and excited that we have had the opportunity to post this grant for everyone. Also, can everyone hear me? If somebody could just give me a thumbs up reaction. Okay, perfect. All right, so starting off with who are our CSP grant contacts. My name is Charlotte Nickelberg. I am the CSP grant manager. We also have Lindsay Denman. She's our Director of Resources and Support for Charter School Authorizing. We will have Charlotte Wehrman, who is our grant manager in our Grants Administration Division. She also works with this grant, so you get two Charlottes. And then we also have Carmen Patrick, and she is our grant negotiator. So once, if you are preliminarily awarded, Carmen will then reach out to you for your grant negotiations before your NOGA is awarded. So our goals for today, I'm going to provide some background information on the CSP grant. We're going to talk about application elements, including our program assurances, the requirements in the application, budgeting and use of funds. We're going to discuss scoring and what that's going to look like as part of the external reviews, and then some critical dates, including when the application needs to be submitted. So starting off with some background information. So the Texas CSP grant is allowed through these statutes and laws, including our ESSA laws, our Texas Quality Charter Schools Program grant that was awarded to TEA by USDE. And then we have our state statutory elements, which are our TEC Chapter 12, our Subchapter C, D, and E, and also our Texas Administrative Code with our sections there. So just a little background on this particular grant that was awarded to the state of Texas from USDE. It is a $100 million grant. It was awarded in the fall of 2020, and it is the grant period runs through September 30th of 2025. So it is a 5-year grant. That $100 million is divided among those 5 years. So we receive approximately $20 million each year. Most of that is granted out to subgrantees. Our LEAs are our subgrantees. So most of those funds are awarded out so that new charters can open or charters can be replicated or expanded. So the purpose of our grant, the whole reason why we're doing all of these things is to support the growth of high quality charter schools in Texas, especially those that are focused on improving the academic outcomes for educationally disadvantaged students. So that's really our overarching purpose for this Texas Charter School Program grant. So let's jump into our overview. So for this particular cycle, we ran a cycle earlier in the year. So this cycle is a little bit smaller than we usually run, but we have a little over $5.5 million available for funding. We are anticipating that we will award approximately 6 grants, and each grant can receive up to $900,000 per award. So that is the maximum award that's allowed. This is a startup grant, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with the uses of funds. So the maximum amount there is $900,000 per award. So for this Subchapter C grant cycle, the beginning date of the project period will be September 1st of 2023. And the ending date will be September 30th of 2025. So a little over your 2 years there for your planning period and your implementation period. So in order for an applicant to be eligible, they must meet the federal definition of a charter school. They must never have received CSP funds under ESSA, and they have to meet the requirements that are outlined in Subchapter C. So that authorization by a local board to designate a campus as a charter. So looking a little bit deeper into what Subchapter C actually says, so it's a campus charter school that's authorized by the local board of trustees pursuant to TEC Chapter 12. We talked a little bit about that earlier, Subchapter C. It has to have taken place on or before May 1st of 2023 as a new charter school or as a charter school that is designed to replicate a new charter school campus. So based on the educational model of an existing high quality charter school, and that submits all the required documentation as stated in the RFA, the campus must be located in a district that has authorized and had in operation at least one charter prior to the 2023 school year. And the charter campus must open prior to Wednesday, September 4th of 2024. So in order to be eligible for this grant, you must meet these criteria in addition to meeting the definition of a charter school and never have received CSP funds under ESSA before. So now moving into our application and support information. So the first part of the application asks for the applicant to identify and address their needs. So you're going to need to list up to 3 quantifiable needs that you've identified through your needs assessment that you're going to use CSP grant funds to address. So once you've identified those needs, then you'll need to describe your plan for addressing each need. So as you see here, we have what is the quantifiable need. So ABC Charter, they looked at their data from 5 surrounding school districts. They determined that the educationally disadvantaged students in those districts are scoring at least 15 points lower on the national and state test in reading ELA when compared to the all students group. So they've named the student group, they named what is that need, they're scoring lower in reading, so there's obviously a need there. And so they are, they have identified that quantifiable need there. Then, in addition to that, they've had their plan for addressing that need. So the charter is going to implement a rigorous reading program. So they identified their need as reading, so they're going to implement this reading program that's going to close the gaps for educationally disadvantaged students. They talk about how they've served this population. The population they currently serve is 97% eco-dis, and they've had success with this current reading program. So we're going to address it through our reading program. We've seen success with this currently at our campuses that we serve this similar population. Teachers are going to be trained in the intensive reading intervention and deliver instruction for various reading levels, and use inquiry circles to increase engagement. So a little more specificity about their reading program. And students are going to receive intense instruction based on where they are with reading comprehension in order to build comprehension and critical thinking skills. So with their plan for addressing their need, they're specifically addressing the need of reading and also addressing the need for that economically disadvantaged student group. All right, here, just highlighting some of those things I talked about. They named the data of what was used to identify the area of need. They named the student group that was identified as having that need. And they named the gap that was identified when they looked at the data. So they were specific about what was that need, what data they used, and what that specific gap was in looking at the data. Then in their plan, they also stated what they're going to do to close that specific gap that was identified. They stated why this plan was chosen. They've got that proven past success that I talked about. And they provided details about their plan. So they're talking about their teachers are going to get training. They're going to use inquiry circles, intensive reading intervention, and intense instruction based on where they are with their reading comprehension skills. So they got a little more specific and detailed about that plan. After you've named your 3 quantifiable needs and the plan for addressing those needs, now you're going to set your summative SMART goal. So this SMART goal, again, a SMART goal, just to remind everyone, is a goal that's specific, measurable, achievable, sometimes attainable. People use those two interchangeably, relevant and timely. So you want this to either be related to student outcomes or something that's consistent with the purpose of our CSP grant, which we discussed a few slides earlier. That purpose can also be found in the program guidelines. So the SMART goal that you're setting should be a summative goal, which means that it's going to be at the end of your grant period. The slide says July 2025. I missed that. It should say September 2025. And you're going to use quarterly benchmarks to determine progress toward that goal. So again, your SMART goal that you're setting is your very end goal. Like when you get to the end of this grant, this is what you want to have accomplished, either related to student outcomes or that what's consistent with the purpose of the CSP grant. So looking at this is a simple format to follow. So by specific date, again, September 2025, that's what the end of our date is. It could also be like August 2025, depending upon what your goal is. A certain percent of, and then naming a student group, whether it's all students or a specific student group or multiple student groups, will achieve, and then putting what is that level of performance you want to see them achieve on a specific assessment or a specific outcome. So looking at your SMART goal, making sure that you're being specific, it's measurable with that percentage, who it is that you're measuring or what you're measuring, what you want that performance to be. So how are you going to know you met that goal? And then what is the test, specific assessment or way that you're going to measure that level of performance? All right, so looking at this example, so we have an example here. So in spring of 2025, 80% of all students will have assessed, who are assessed, will have achieved acceptable performance on the reading ELA examinations that are part of the STAR test. A non-example would be by January of 2024, students in grades 3 through 5 will be reading on or above grade level. So why is this a non-example? Well, first, it's not summative. It's setting a goal for January 2024, which is in the middle of the grant period and not at the end. It also doesn't include a percentage of students, so it's not really measurable. It just says students in grades 3 through 5. So which students in grades 3 through 5? And how many do you want to see? And it doesn't include a specific assessment that will be used. It just says that they'll be reading on or above grade level, but it doesn't say how we're going to measure that. So once you've set your SMART goal, next you're going to identify benchmarks that you will use at the end of your first 3 grant quarters to measure your progress toward being the process or the implementation goals that you have defined for the grant. So you're going to have a first quarter benchmark, a second quarter benchmark, and a third quarter benchmark. So you want to make sure that you're planning backwards from your summative goal. So once you've set your summative goal, thinking through what progress you want to make in each quarter and how you're going to measure that, what benchmarks you're going to use, and what you want that goal to be in each quarter, so that you are ensuring that you're making progress throughout the grant period to set you up to meet that summative goal at the end. The next part of the application focuses on project evaluation and modification. So the application asks you to describe how you're going to use your project evaluation data to determine when and how to modify your program. So if you see that you're not making progress toward meeting your summative SMART goal, you're going to describe how you're going to use that data to modify your program as needed. So if you see in your quarters that you're not making the progress, how are you going to collect that data? How are you going to analyze that data? And then how are you going to use that data to adjust your program as needed to make sure that you are meeting your summative goal? The next section is our program assurances. So these are going to be check boxes on the application that focus on these specific areas. So for each one of these, you'll need to read the statement and assure that you are going to meet each one of those things. These are some of these are our statutory requirements. Some of these are just some our program assurances, but you want to make sure that you're going through and checking each one of the boxes that is applicable, and that you agree to meet those assurances. So continued on, you will still see there will be additional these for you to make sure that you are checking. Again, these are our assurances here. So you'll have those additional assurances that talk about attending TALA, your authorizing policy, and how you determine that you're partnering with a high quality CMO or IMO. And so you'll make sure again that you're reading those assurances and checking those boxes. The next part of our application goes back into our narrative form. So for these, you're going to read each statutory requirement and respond to each part of the question. So our first question focuses on the roles and responsibilities of the eligible applicant and the partner organization. So describing there what role the district's going to play versus what role the charter organization is going to play, and really spelling out those roles and responsibilities for each entity and how you're going to work together. The second question focuses on quality controls. So thinking of through how you're looking at the contract or performance agreement, and how the school's performance in the accountability system will impact on student achievement will be the most important factor for renewal or revocation. So thinking through the quality controls that you have, the checks and balances that you have to make sure that everyone is on the same page and that the terms of the contract and the success of students is our most important factor to determine moving forward. Question 3 focuses on autonomy and flexibility. So describing how that autonomy and flexibility is going to be granted to the charter school campus. For subchapter C charters, you want to make sure that you're describing how the autonomy is above and beyond the flexibility and autonomy that's afforded to traditional campuses within the school district. So you really want to make sure that you're highlighting how this autonomy and flexibility is going to be different for this campus, since it is going to be a campus charter, how that's going to go above and beyond what's already granted to other traditional campuses that are within the school district. So making sure that you provide that detailed description of how that autonomy and flexibility is going to be granted to that campus. Our fourth narrative question in the statutory requirements is focused on soliciting and considering input from parents and other members of the community on the implementation and operation of the proposed charter school. So thinking through how you're going to continue to solicit and consider input from your parents and community members as the school opens and you're going through implementation and operation. Question 5 asks for your planned activities and expenditures of grant funds. You don't have to be specific about dollar amounts in this section, but talking through what are the planned activities for these funds, what are you going to do to make this charter, to help this charter get off the ground and get started up, and thinking through how you're going to use those funds to create this high quality charter campus, and then how you're going to maintain the financial sustainability after the end of the grant period. Question 6 asks you to describe how you are supporting the use of effective parent, family, and community engagement strategies. So how are you engaging your parents and your families? How are you engaging the community? And how are you going to have those ongoing? Question 7 asks for your plan for meeting the transportation needs of the students at the proposed charter school campuses. We know that charters are not required to provide transportation, although most of our district authorized charters do still provide that transportation. But if you're planning not to, you will still need to address how you're going to provide transportation for students who have IEPs. Question 8 asks if you are requesting for any waivers and the justification for those waivers if you are requesting them. If you are not planning to apply for any waivers, you would just put here no waivers requested. But if you are, then you'll need to put in why you believe that is necessary for the successful operation of the charter school. And tell us, justification as to why you are wanting to request this waiver. And James, I see your question in the chat. I'll address it when I get to the end of this section. So number 9, this is for our Sub-C applicants, which is everyone who's eligible for this grant. So the first part is to describe your educational program at this charter school. So thinking through how you're going to enable all the students on this campus to meet the state student achievement, academic achievement standards, the grade levels and ages of the children that are going to be served, and the curriculum and instructional practices that are going to be used. So really describing your educational program and how it's going to impact the students on the particular campus that's going to be our charter campus. Number 9 of our statutory requirements, I think that might be numbered incorrectly, but for a high quality, this is just a continuation, I'm sorry. A high quality charter is one that either meets the requirements for high quality designation as outlined in our Texas Administrative Code, or it meets the following federal definition. So thinking through if the charter that you're partnering with is a high quality charter. Number 10 asks you to describe how the district authorizer is going to monitor the proposed charter campus in recruiting, enrolling, retaining, and meeting the needs of all students, including the children with disabilities and English learners. So how is the district going to monitor that to ensure that all students' needs are being met? Requirement number 11 asks you to describe how your annual independent financial audit of the campus is going to be conducted. So this is something that is required, and you must have a plan for the audit that is separate and apart from the district's annual financial audit. So this goes along with looking at your grant funds and the campus as a whole. So describing your plan for the annual independent financial audit. Question 12 is focused on PEIMS and describing the manner that the campus will provide information necessary for the school district in which it's located to participate in PEEM. So how are you going to work with the district on reporting that information through PEEMs? Number 13 asks for how the district is going to flow the federal and state funds to the proposed charter school campus. Remember, that goes back to our supplement, not supplant. So thinking through those timelines of how those funds are going to flow through that charter campus, and how, so that students are receiving the benefits of service that they should be receiving from federal and state funds. All right, so I'm going to pause for just a minute so I can read James's question. If a school district partners with someone through 1882 partnership as a subchapter C, and the school district, which is a current ISD, has created a campus number within the district that is K through 12, then the partner uses funds generated by the new students to allow them to enroll in private schools of their choice anywhere. Will this grant still be available? That is a good question. I do not know the answer to that one right offhand, but I will make sure that I address it in the FAQs. So I will make sure that I get back to that one and include it in the FAQs. And I'll try to get you an answer earlier, James. If you'll put your email address in the chat, then I can get an answer. I can email an answer over to you and then also include it in the FAQs. So our TEA program requirements, again, these are some of our short answers. You're going to have to populate these. So we want to know the projected population that's going to be served in 23-24 and also in 24-25. So we want to make sure that we are including the students and what grade levels they're going to be in. So how many students are going to be in each grade level. Again, this is projected populations. We also want to know the projected number of students who would have attended an F-rated campus in 23-24 if they did not attend this charter campus. Include the names and CDC numbers of the F-rated campuses. And then census tract number if your campus is located in a qualified opportunity zone. Number 6 is a short answer narrative question. We're asking you to describe your admission policies for your charter campus. If more students apply, then you are able to accommodate. So describing your lottery procedure to admit students. This is something that is required for if you have too many students that apply, is the use of a lottery. So describing how you're going to apply those lottery procedures. One thing I want to note, and this is not a narrative question in the application, but it's something that I just want to make sure that everyone understands for our subchapter Cs, is that your local charter board cannot cede power to the larger charter management organizations board. Your local charter board must be involved in that decision making. So not your local board of trustees for the school district, but the local charter board that is set up to support the campus charter. So just making sure that the local charter board is the one who's involved and not all power ceded to the larger charter management organizations board. All right, so for our subchapter C application, we are not requiring a notice of intent to apply, but you will have to submit attachment 1, which is the federal definition of a charter school. You'll need to read the definition and initial next to each part of the definition, and then it will be signed at the bottom to acknowledge that, yes, as long as we have this grant, we're making sure that they are, the campus is meeting the federal definition of a charter school. Additionally, you'll have the following attachments that you'll need to include. So documentation of your authorization to charter, your board of trustees approval, a narrative description from the superintendent of that this is approved, and then that we're on board, the superintendent is on board with this campus becoming a charter. And then attachment 5, which can also be found on our TEA opportunities page, attachment 5 and attachment 1 can both be found there. Your priority points for subchapter C. So there's going to be some questions on there that you'll need to answer. These are questions around if you attended TALA, if you have 1882 benefits, those kinds of things related to priority points that can be awarded for our subchapter C schools. So now we're going to talk about scoring and review. So how are the applications going to be scored and reviewed? So for our standard review criteria, you can see each part of the grant application and the points associated with each one of those. So you're going to get points for each one of those areas that we discussed in the application. Then you're also going to receive some specific review criteria for 10 points. And this is looking at the alignment between your SMART goals, the needs you identified at the beginning of the application, and the measurable progress sections. So making sure that all of those things can be achieved during the grant period, but they are also all aligned and make sense with each other. So between those two, you can get a total of 70 points. In order to move forward in the grant application and be awarded priority points if eligible, the grant applicant will have to achieve at least 70% of those 70 points. So they will have to get 49 points of the 70 available in order to move forward to potentially be awarded priority points. So for our subchapter C schools, our priority points focus on the strength of the district authorizing practices, the strength of the operator, the strength of the need and community demand, and then if the proposed charter will open in a QOZ. And so you can receive priority points based on those things for your subchapter C schools. So again, if you achieve the 49 points in the review criteria, at the first section, then you can be awarded priority points if you are eligible in these areas. So the maximum amount of points that anyone can receive is 110 points if you got all the points for the standard review criteria, and then also for the priority. So after each application is scored, we do rank them from highest scoring to lowest scoring, and that is generally how we make our grant awards. So we start with the highest scoring application and then continue by moving to the next highest, the next highest, the next highest until our funds are exhausted, or there are applications that are not meeting the minimum percentage score to be funded, whichever is the case first. So now we're going to talk about our budget and use of funds. So we're going to dive into our allowable and unallowable cost for this CSP grant. So this is a startup grant for charter campuses. So there are two phases for this grant, our planning phase and our implementation phase. So the planning phase can generally be described as the period from the grant start date, which is September 1, until the charter begins serving students. And then our implementation phase is the period after the charter school begins to serve students. So if we were looking at it in a calendar way, that's what that would be. However, your funds are budgeted according to the type of activity and not necessarily when the expenditure occurs. So you have things that are considered planning activities and then things that are considered implementation activities. So defining the difference between a planning activity and an implementation activity, our planning activities are tied to our planning and design of the educational program, which could include the refinement of your education, of the desired educational results and of methods for measuring progress towards achieving those results. Or it could include things like professional development for teachers and other staff who will work in the charter school. So really thinking about if it's a planning activity, it's really focused on planning and design of your educational program. An implementation activity, on the other hand, is tied to the initial implementation of your charter school, which could include informing the community about the school, getting the necessary equipment and educational materials and supplies, acquiring or developing curriculum materials, or initial operational costs that cannot be met with state or local sources. So again, implementation is tied to that initial implementation of the charter school. So thinking about some allowable costs with our planning activities, so things that could be allowable under planning. The planning and design of your charter school's educational program, professional development or training for teachers and staff, or special education support. Some allowable costs for implementation activities. Again, these are one-time startup equipment purchases that would be necessary to implement your charter school. So desk and chairs and computers, equipment related to technology and physical education and art, and playground equipment. These are things that you need in order to implement your charter school as startup equipment. You could also, through your implementation activities, purchase non-consumable supplies and materials for the startup activities. So thinking about textbooks, library books, reading materials, teaching materials, as long as they are non-consumable supplies and materials that are part of the startup of your charter school. You can also cover installation costs that are associated with computers, data systems, networks, or telephone systems. So you can buy the equipment and also the cost associated with installing that equipment. Allowable costs also include our one-time startup costs associated with transportation, rental or occupancy costs for a school facility up to the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase. So that would be the initial implementation phase starts when you start serving students. So you can pay for rental and occupancy costs for planning and through the first 30 days of implementation. And costs associated with carrying out necessary renovations and minor facility repairs. So not construction. Construction is definitely not allowed. You can't add any, principal to the building or add any like extended life, but you can carry out costs associated with like necessary renovations or minor facility repairs. You are also allowed to purchase financial management software and training, property insurance to cover the equipment that you purchase with the grant funds, and other appropriate non-sustained costs that cannot be supported from other sources are allowable under the CSP grant. You are also allowed to pay salaries for the following people: teachers, school leaders, and specialized instructional support personnel salaries. Those are allowed. So can't pay maintenance or front office staff or anything that is not considered a teacher, school leader, or specialized instructional support personnel. You can find the definition of specialized instructional support personnel in the program guidelines that are on our TEA grants opportunity page. However, with the salaries. You are only allowed to pay for those salaries during the planning and up to the first 30 days of the implementation phase. Again, implementation phase starts the day students are served. And so you can pay for those salaries for that select group during the planning phase and then during the first 30 days of implementation. The expenses that you pay have to be associated with the planning activities or implementation activities and can't be considered an ongoing operation. So it has to be directly tied to a planning activity or an implementation activity. And that's because this is considered a startup grant. So when asking yourself about this cost that you're going to have as come out of your CSP grant, you want to ask yourself these questions. Is it necessary, reasonable, allocable, and allowable? So necessary is the item needed for the startup of the charter school. Reasonable, would a reasonable person spend that amount on that item, and would it withstand public scrutiny? I always like to say, would it pass the newspaper test? If you read it in the newspaper, would you be okay with it? Allocable is the cost being incurred specifically for startup, and is the cost proportional to the benefit that's provided? And then is it allowable? Is the item allowed under this grant program? You can find, again, the complete list of allowable and unallowable expenditures in the program guidelines. So key takeaway here with our allowable costs, our CSP grant supports our planning, our program design, and the initial implementation of the public charter schools. These are things that are one-time costs. So not an ongoing cost, but a one-time startup cost to support the planning, program design, and initial implementation. So we've talked about allowable costs, so now let's take a look at unallowable costs under this grant program. So field trips, hosting, or sponsoring of conferences or advisory councils, cost of membership in any civic or community organization, salaries or contracted personnel beyond the first 30 days of the implementation phase, debt service and rental or occupancy costs for the school facility beyond the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase. Again, these are unallowable out of the CSP grant funds. You also cannot purchase out of these funds consumable, instructional, or other supplies and materials, accounting or bookkeeping services, except for the purchase of accounting software to comply with FAR, purchase or lease of land or real estate. Construction is not allowed, and that includes activities for which an architect or an engineer must be utilized. Annual audit services, ongoing food service, and other property and liability insurance are unallowable expenses out of the CSP grant. Additionally, you cannot pay interest on loans from this grant. Deposits of any kind, like security deposits or service deposits. No religious instruction materials or insignia can be purchased with this grant. And extracurricular activities such as UIL, competitions, athletic programs that are not part of the state required PE program are unallowable costs from the CSP grant. So we also do not allow direct or indirect administrative costs to be charged to the grant program, again, because it is a one-time cost. And administrative costs are generally for ongoing services. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of, is it allowable? So I have a list here of budgeted expense, and then we're going to look and see if it's allowable or unallowable. So you can take this test on your end and see how many you get right. So the first budgeted expense I have is the design and construction of a new state-of-the-art building a passenger van to provide transportation for students, technology and technology installation for every classroom, the salaries of clerical and custodial staff members during the planning phase, instructional supplies that are reusable, such as textbooks, and training for staff to support the implementation of those materials, shirts, pens, pencils, and notepads with the school's logo and name printed on them, and the price of repairing the faulty HVAC system in the school building. So these are the budgeted expenses that this person has put into their application. All right, so let's see if it's allowable or unallowable. All right, so our first one, design and construction of our new state-of-the-art building, unallowable. Yes, it would be wonderful to have that building, but you cannot pay for construction or designing of things with the CSP grant funds. A passenger van to provide transportation is allowable. It is a one-time cost for transportation. Technology and technology installation is allowable out of CSP grant. Salaries for our clerical and custodial staff members in the planning phase. No, this is not allowable. It's not allowable at any time for clerical or custodial staff members' salaries to be paid out of the CSP grant. Remember, it has to be a teacher, a school leader, or that specialized instructional support personnel. Instructional supplies that are reusable is allowable, and you can also pay for the training for staff to support the implementation. Our shirts, pens, pencils, and notepads with the school's logo is not allowable. It doesn't have anything related to registration or communication of how to register for the charter, so it is not an allowable cost. And then the price to repair the faulty HVAC system is allowable because it is a minor repair that is keeping the school in operation. So I hope everyone made 100 on that. All right, so we have gone through our application, the different parts of the application, how those applications are going to be scored. We've talked about use of funds, both allowable and unallowable. So now let's talk about our next steps and some critical dates. So May 22nd, right around the corner, is your last day to submit questions for inclusion in the FAQs. I had a question here today that will be included in the FAQs, but if you have any other questions that come up or anything that you thought of here that you didn't put in the chat, I'll provide my email address again at the end, or you can send it to our general mailbox as well. Then you can submit questions that will be included in the FAQs. The FAQs will be posted on the TEA Grant Opportunities page no later than the close of business on May 30th. So that gives us time to answer the questions, put them in our FAQ document, and post them no later than May 30th. Your application due date is going to be on June 20th of 2023. You will submit that via email to competitivegrants@tea.texas.gov. So do not send in a paper copy. Do not send it directly to me. You have to email it to the competitive grants email address that you see here. That has to be received on June 20th, 2023 by 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So make sure that you get that in. That application and all of the attachments have to be submitted via email on to that email address by this date and time. Again, our grant period, our grant start date is going to be September 1st of 2023, and our grant end date is going to be September 30th of 2025. So just keeping those things in mind of this is going to be your grant period, of the time that you'll have to spend the funds and to measure progress is during this time. Okay, so we're at the end now. These are our, if you have any questions, you can submit all the questions in writing to charterschools@tea.texas.gov by 5 o'clock on May 22nd. I will get the answers to those questions, and they will be posted on the TEA Grant Opportunities website no later than May 30th. I'm also going to put in the chat my email address, so if you you can also email me directly. And I can include those in the FAQ as well. So that is my email address that I just put in the chat. So I'm happy to help. I'm going to be like your main program contact for the CSP grant, both during this time, and then if you're awarded, I'll be your contact for program issues or questions throughout the duration of the grant as well. So I thank you all so much for joining me today. And I hope that this webinar helped you, was informative, and I appreciate it.